Welcome to Above Spirituality. It's your man Alexander Lewis, Gino, for episode 2, and he's gonna walk you through everything, spirituality and all. Gino, nice to meet you again.
Yeah, likewise.
So, what is higher consciousness?
So, before I answer the question, I just want to address, even why it's a relevant question. In my opinion, in my direct experience, having taught spiritual classes, studied spiritual teachings, shit like that, is that the whole goal of like all spiritual work, all spiritual community, is to help someone rise in consciousness. So higher consciousness then is just an elevated state of who and what we are. You know, if you like really want to go into it, it can go so high above like where you are right now, because it could just be like you're Christian, you're just a better person, or you understand more about the world, you see the truth, something kind of like that. But it can go so far into like for those who like really make it somewhere with spiritual practice, that like they do not even experience the world and themselves the same way like a baseline human being does. And spiritual work is just trying to move you up that chain.
Is it like once you hit that spiritual level, like what is life like? Do you feel more? Do you feel less? Do you feel more in the moment? Are you detached from the world in a way, or are you just at one with yourself and your surroundings?
That's actually a really good question. First disclaimer, I'm not like in that state, so I don't really know. However, I'm a nerd. I love like researching stuff. And so I researched and I saw like what did they say that it was like, them being like saints, yogis, like enlightened people and stuff. And what it seems like is as we grow in consciousness, before you kind of cross a threshold, yeah, it's like you really do feel more. That's kind of more like what I experienced, through spiritual work and spiritual practices. You get in touch a lot more with yourself. Like we were talking about last episode, you get more in touch with your spirit. And guess what a lot of your spirit is? It's feelings, it's emotions, it's the sensation of meaning. However, what the whole like doctrine of enlightenment is eventually there is a transcendence. There's a going beyond of like a lot of like your human earthly identity. And, the Buddha uses such words as like void or like infinite stillness. St. Paul calls it like the peace of God beyond words. Like in some ways, you stop feeling certain things. And probably most notably, the thing that just no longer arises, like in your direct experience, is suffering. People may have heard that like nirvana, being the Buddhist word for enlightenment, means to blow out a candle. And so you start to think, oh, does that mean to feel nothing? And there's lots of, especially Buddhist terminologies that would make you feel like as you rise in consciousness, you feel less and less. But when I was doing all the research, it's really not that you feel nothing or that your experience sort of poofs. There's a whole new context of experiences and feelings that you have. And they generally agree it's a lot better than the human experience.
I think it sounds pretty nice. Kind of to go in the same realm. I've been doing meditation for probably, roughly a decade in my own time kind of terms, not in like kind of by the books or like kind of where you've been. But I found when I meditate inside, like a house like this, but when I meditate outside on the beach or something, I can feel the soil and I can feel the earth. when I come out of that meditation, for some reason I just feel so much more like just connected in a way. Is there something about that? Is there a place and time? Is it all kind of in one world?
We're definitely gonna have to do a whole episode about meditation. But it just really, before you to even like get a little bit away from the very kind of mystical, high level term that like higher consciousness could be, like the whole transcendence of reality, the ending of suffering, eternal life, simple concepts like that. Um, just think about what you're doing when you're meditating. A lot of people like to think of meditating as like zoning out. And I think I might be wrong, but I think I remember Alan Watts saying it. It's really zoning in. You're connecting with something like the background silence of your mind or your breath, like the most fundamental of your physiological processes. Or, you're just really zoning into your body. And a guy I really loved his work, I'm sure a lot of people who are going to watch this have probably heard of him, is Eckhart Tolle. And Tolle was very big into attaining a higher state of consciousness by radically tuning into the present moment, hence his book, The Power of Now. And one of the things he said, there are several portals like into that higher realm. And a big one he said is the body. So I think kind of like, as you do the practices, you're still attempting that one thing, that one world, which is to elevate my state of consciousness just to get to a higher place. But there are several ways to do that, Meditation done with a chant, probably going to feel different than meditation done by yourself. Meditation inside a building, different than outside a building. But you're just trying to move up that ladder.
One thing I find funny about this whole kind of getting in a flow state, living in the now, some people can never let go. Like they can never slow down their thoughts. They can never let go of blockages just to let life happen. So with meditation, I feel like that is the most powerful thing, to let go and let life happen. But people can never do that. And that's not even a question, it's just flat out what it is. All right, so I have some of your questions here. What is enlightenment? And for the people of the everyday Joe, break it down to us.
So enlightenment is something that's pretty obviously, thrown around a lot in like a spiritual context. Literally entire like world religions are dedicated to it. A lot of people in like common English will ask like, hey, but like, just becoming like a better person, kind of like growing as a person, what I was kind of earlier describing as like going up in consciousness, is that enlightenment? And in English, yes. However, what the phrase is really referring to is that sort of like paradigm shift we were talking about earlier. Enlightenment, as it comes from, Eastern cultures, specifically those of India and like the Indian subcontinent, refers to a phenomena in spiritual growth where your direct perception of the world is now totally different than a normal person's. And the defining qualities are that generally the ego disappears. That there is an end of that sense of identity, that sense of individuality. One of my favorite authors who supposedly entered the state, a guy named David Hawkins, he described it in the back of his books. He said, one day after I had this experience, the mind that was called David went silent and never had another thought. The rest of his life was this spontaneous happening he mostly witnessed. And this, when you do the research and do the homework, this is what it seems to be. This is like one of the defining faculties of it. Now, ultimately, when I first found that out, that sounds scary as hell. Like that. Oh, you mean it sounds like, oh, you mean I die? Like I'm just gone? But that's a misunderstanding. And in fact, the Buddha himself had to address it a lot. Like he was rather constantly accused that he was trying to destroy beings. And he's like, I never said that. So what seems to happen in the enlightened state is there is a progressive set of realizations. Your individual sense gets replaced by what Ramana Maharishi says is like this great presence everywhere. He said that's Shiva. He said that's God. You see there's this infinite presence that is guiding all things, was always doing so. You were just ignorant of it. And you come to realize that more and more as yourself. In addition to maybe the trade-off of your individual will is a whole new perception of the world, an ending forever of fundamental mental and emotional pain. This is no longer something that happens to you. For anyone who, if you're going to believe in enlightenment, you probably believe in past lives. They also say after the state, you start to remember the extent of your existence. Again, when David Hawkins had it at one experience with it, he said, when that state came on and you kind of remembered eternity, he said it was almost funny. Like, how could I have forgotten? So and perhaps even another time we'll have an episode going into the various states that seem to be revealed. The Buddha talked about them at length. There are the 9 or 10 yanas, knowings, as I understand them. To the average person, enlightenment is almost like the next stage in human spiritual evolution, or just evolution in general. It is a state that's supposedly eternal, feels really good, and frees you from suffering and from the need for death, or even the need to be reincarnated. It can be existential. That was my experience of it. That's a common spiritual error that a good teacher who runs into a student, who realizes that, your ego trying to defend itself will think it's going to die. And they will explain, no, you don't cease. Your direct experience never ends. I think what's even more important to know for the average person is that does not have to be your goal with spiritual work. It can be, and in both senses, growing in consciousness, coming to a higher state of consciousness is the more important thing, and it's always a good, safe thing to do.
Why in America compared to let's say India or other places, Middle Eastern places, I feel like over there, spirituality and religion, I feel like many more people are on board and it's not a taboo thing. But when you're in America, if you talk about religion or spirituality, it's not really the government's not saying, hey, this is the best thing for you. They're pushing all these other sideways things. And I feel like if it, for people like us, we're blessed to be able to know this enlightenment and follow it. But why isn't it mainstream to the point of people would either go to a sporting event than go to a spiritual class? If it's because I put it as top tier 1, but why isn't it, since it's since it should be the ultimate goal, why isn't it on the ultimate planner? Why isn't it pushed like that?
Well, first and foremost, you can remember, kind of culturally, America is a nation of rebels. That was our whole thing. Is we were we don't want to be told what to do. We want to tell other people what to do, and then be mad at them if they tell us what to do. That was kind of that's fundamentally pretty American, in my opinion. Of course, just the day you're born, if you start to learn about the political founding of the country, separate church and state. And then also, we're here in the North, we're here in Chicago. You go to other places in the country, it's not really a question of like, where you're going to be every Sunday morning. That's where you're going to go. That with all that in mind though, in other nations, their culture is just that's still very much more rooted. There are also some cultures, some other nations are less diverse in general. So they kind of, that power of that group consciousness holds them together and gives them both the benefits of that in the community and the support and the not having to worry about things, and the drawbacks, such as, you fall into dogma. A little bit. Sleep deprived, mostly. It's Nils makes an excellent cup of coffee. Yes, he does. Anyway, let me regather my thought. You see, in a lot of modern spiritual contexts, in a lot of more open-minded, even traditional spiritual contexts, especially of the East, the whole purpose of human life is to rise in consciousness, is to grow as people, to evolve as, you could say souls or entities or whatever. And the main vehicle for doing that is just normal, everyday human life. All human life, regardless of if, you're a subscriber to the podcast, thanks for all the subscribes and the likes on the channel. Our audience, you, my friends, you probably believe in something spiritual. And that's great. That's intentionally choosing to grow spiritually. However, all of our fellow men and women, all of our fellow Americans, people on this planet, that's what they're doing too, through their normal human life. So it's not that in the view of Plato, Plato believed in reincarnation, and he just saw that you had to learn all the lessons that life could give you, and there's no way you could reasonably do that in one life. It stands to reason then that there are certain lessons that you're really only going to learn through a regular human life, that being spiritual might hinder. So it's not that any of our fellows who maybe sadly aren't subscribers are doing something bizarre or weird. They might just be learning other lessons. That being said, the allure of the physical world is a lot stronger than often the allure of the spiritual world, because the spiritual world, spiritual work is often going against your ego, trying to transcend your nature. You can't choose revenge. You can't live the most indulgent life. You have to put others in front of yourself at times. And a lot of people just don't want to choose that because, they want to experience the world and all of the cravings of it.
And it's really hard not to. It's so hard not to, because especially in America, we have everything all the time, and everything's a yes, and we can do whatever we want, whenever you want. Especially when you throw money on top of it, wow, it takes a special man to be able to not indulge in every aspect of life. And I just hope when I'm at a top level or whatever, that I can maintain my humbleness and not indulge in all these cravings of USA. So I might just take a dip to India for like a year and just, come back with hopefully clean my mind and clean my slate. You feel me? All right, this is some Chat GPT. I threw in just some spiritual, hey, throw me some questions of spiritual life, and this is what came out. How has your understanding of death and the afterlife influenced your spiritual beliefs or practices?
Shout out ChatGPT. So this is obviously one of the big questions and reason why we even feel drawn to spirituality, because, fundamentally being an intelligent being means that you are aware that you will one day die. And obviously that scares the hell out of you because you have little, if to no proof that there's anything beyond it. And you have entire like aspects of your psyche and probably even your biology that are their whole purpose is like, don't die, fear death, don't die. So we wonder to these things. For me, I think as I talked last episode, I was raised Catholic. So belief in an afterlife is one of like the entire points of the faith. But as I kind of grew, I was always really led to beliefs in reincarnation. And specifically, I was led to this belief because when I was very young, when I was about 7 or 8, my grandfather passed. And he was awesome. And it really deeply affected my mother. And my mother, also being Italian, she just never really was super Christian. So she didn't have a lot to fall back on, and she fell into kind of like a darker depression. She's a hairdresser. Her clients, her sister, they got into some of the works of people like Brian Weiss and Michael Newton, who were hypnotherapists. And they were, like a lot of hypnotherapists, actually, it was later revealed, were practicing something called regression therapy, which is kind of like a standard hypnosis. They put you into a subconscious state. They walk you backward through events to get to some tragic event so you can recontextualize it and heal. And what they were starting to discover was that, hey, a lot of their clients, their patients, were starting to remember other people's lives. And then they were claiming, no, but that was me. And in fact, something that happened to that person is the reason why I'm suffering or struggling with this issue now. Which, of course, if you're spiritually inclined, you'd be like, oh, yeah, karma. So that was an idea given to me at a very young age. Then, of course, I started studying like other faiths and was even able to reconcile that with a lot of my Christian understandings. So for me, and I don't think it's the final authority, my biggest reference on understanding the afterlife was the work of Dr. Michael Newton. For anyone who has not read the book Journey of Souls, frankly, I was thinking about giving you two a copy and then, we should read it and then just talk about it. It's a phenomenal book, easy read, very powerful. Supposedly the afterlife is, like Jesus said, that you are not of this world. That's your home. You spend significantly more time, you would say, there. And in that place, you rest, you enjoy, you learn. There is no true sense of pain and guilt. There's even like, as I describe it, kind of like jobs that you have over there, roles. You leave and return from that place to worlds like this, or in certain theologies and beliefs, other worlds, not even physical ones, for the purpose of learning those life lessons, like Plato had said. And what was very interesting was like the soul's perspective on a body. I won't go into that too deep, but like that even like the particulars of your nature and your nurture, your hereditary biology and the circumstances of your life are curated. Sometimes to be very different than your nature as a person, sometimes as like a soul person, and sometimes to be very similar so that you can have a particular experience. One of the core things that I really took from a lot of work like that was the abundant forgiving and understanding nature of the other side. It was not that one could, sin without consequence on earth, but it was more that on the other side, on the real side where pain and injury is impossible, unless self-inflicted, they had this radical understanding of just like understanding that the human world is a brutal, violent, difficult place. And they received the just and the unjust alike, which is like what it says in the book of Matthew, that God sends his rains on the rain of his righteousness or something like that on the wicked and the just alike. It is actually can be very difficult to reconcile for a lot of human beings, how there actually might not be punishment on the other side, punishment only existing in the human world, usually self-inflicted. So I hope that answers the question.
It actually perfectly goes into our next chat GPT question. How do you approach the concept of karma or the law of cause and effect in your spiritual worldview?
I love that they called it the law of cause and effect, because in my school, the school of metaphysics, that's what we like to refer to as karma. We do call it karma sometimes too. Now, karma itself is an interesting word. It's a Sanskrit word. It has a couple meanings. In a lot of ways, it just means doing or action. And one of its tenets, of which there are kind of many, we're going to focus on two, is that your action leads to further results that leads to another actions. And it follows this principle. The essence of your action, which includes both the intention and the result, will lead to further actions and happening of the same intention and of the same consequence. So, for example, most faiths take a hard stance against killing, or at least against murder. That to kill leads to bad karma. So you might say, like St. Peter said, like Jesus said, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword, So you might say, okay, if you were a murderer in one life, if you did not get murdered in that life, if you come back to this place, you would likely become the victim of murder. Now, that's just in a very physical sense. And that's where a lot of people start to think that, oh, if I have bad things going on in my life, I must have bad karma. Before we explore what I think is actually a more important aspect of karma, the other thing about that first aspect, of that sort of domino effect of actions, is your intention. In that it is a different karma. Like if I got up and I killed Nils just for the sheer glee of killing Nils, just because that was, hi Nils, that would lead to a specific type of karma, because it's not only the result of what I did, it was the intention behind it in the consciousness of my mind. Whereas, like, if I killed Nils, if I killed Nils because that was to stop him from, killing Alexander, there's still a consequence, but there's a whole different sort of track to the way the dominoes could go. I always like to see it as kind of a domino thing. Now, that's like the main way, from my experience, teaching like spiritual classes, metaphysics classes, that students will come with like an understanding of like what karma is, or like why do they have the circumstances of their life. And in truth, to me, it is the more base and uneducated understanding of karma. To me, actually, the bigger reason why karma exists in all is that the spirit of the world, of consciousness of God, is trying to educate us and is trying to lead us to a more evolved state. Karma is not just about reward and punishment. Karma is about you becoming that which you are. And it's also about the inner life within you trying to lead you to greatness. So you might be born in a rough circumstances, abusive parents, and this can be kind of heavy. This can be difficult to accept. You might struggle a lot in your life. You might have opportunities taken from you, even though you are a good person, or you have not committed sins. And you might think, oh, I probably have shit karma. I must have been being punished for things in past lives, which I don't want to use the word punishment, but maybe. But far more likely is that there were soul lessons that you learned from these things. Like common examples is you learn stuff like forgiveness, resilience, bravery, resourcefulness, inner soul and mental qualities that you would not have learned in an easy life. This can all seem very unjust just because of how terrible like it is to actually go through that life. But from the soul's perspective, even Jesus said, don't store your treasures on earth, store them in heaven. That's like to say that, to put the physical life as the first and most important thing is not wise. Because as he says, where rust destroys and thieves can steal. But that which you gain from a difficult life is yours forever, supposedly. So that is my current understanding of karma. Yes, it is a balancing of that which you have done, including the good things. It is an evolution of like you becoming that which you are. So like if you are a loving person, you're going to probably be led to loving experiences or to things that will heighten your understanding of love. And it is that the spirit of life wants you to evolve. You want to evolve. All people have an inner urge to grow. Karma helps to facilitate that. Cause and effect helps to facilitate that.
Y'all should listen in on that one. That's some game right there. Yeah, and it's just so damn exciting, man. All of it is, and I believe like I hate to just say the word pain, but like like you lift weights, you get stronger type deal. Going through those things, especially as like a younger man or child or whatever, you can blossom up and take those mental notes. But some people, let's say you go through some abusiveness as a kid or something. When you become a man, you become the richest man, you become the most successful man, but there's like a little demon that lives inside of them because, they're like your soul child. And that person can lead to be like an aggressive, like kind of like a monster and like kind of lash out. And he doesn't really know why because it's his soul child. How would you tell people to, as life goes on, how to kind of clean the plate of your past? Is that through meditation? Is that through spirituality? And what's the best way to confront that? Is it therapy? Because I feel like that's the only way to, one step backwards, two step forwards or whatever. How would you approach that?
So, yeah, kind of like the answer is yes, all of the above. First, you need to address something that makes the human experience very valuable for the learning of karma is how your psyche kind of works, which is probably related to how your nervous system works. When you experience intense emotion, especially negative emotion, your brain codes so many neurons and like you learn things, you make assumptions about the world. And especially if that happened very young when your brain was still forming, that is what creates that demon, which is more so this lingering feeling and idea that is just coded into your consciousness. Karmically, this kind of helps to serve because, according to some people, the whole purpose of your human life was to, in this life, as Alexander, as Gino, as beautiful listener of the podcast, viewer of the short, was to learn something specific. And what many people who get involved with spiritual work will often notice, it's like, hey, I thought I learned the lesson. And then like years later, it showed up again. And I was like at square one. And that's because it takes a lot of time to learn these things. It takes a lot of effort and understanding. You are this truly impressive spiritual being. You don't just, you need a deep understanding of the thing. And given that this thing gets coded into you and sticks with you, you really don't have a choice but to continuously address it and learn from it. Outside of the human body, according to a lot of the people that, I've studied that research that experience, this is less of an issue. You're no longer burdened by these things on the other side. That doesn't mean, though, that we don't try to address and heal the wounds of our past. In fact, again, if you look at, like the story of Christ, healing others was like one of the main things he did. And thus, we must heal ourselves. We don't just need to persist in this. Spiritual work, rising in consciousness, aims to do precisely that. A higher state of consciousness is at the more grounded level, less affected by the world within and without, more loving, more intelligent, more wise, has more energy, more capacity for both intellectual understanding and emotional understanding. Through spiritual work, which I would 100% call therapy and counseling in all its forms a spiritual work. You are working with the spirit of yourself and your consciousness. Meditation helps us as well by helping to not only balance the nervous system, which is often the cause of that demon, it's just something coded into your wires. It also places the focus of your attention on realms of inner consciousness beyond that. In certain forms of Buddhism, they have this concept called prajna, which usually refers to like being in a very high, like transcendental state where you're basically tripping out. And that just by being there, your soul gains an understanding. But that's true even at the lower levels, in my opinion. Just by being there and experiencing, admittedly, like nothing, it has an effect on the psyche that is healing and is positive. Most spiritual work aims to bring you to confront what was within you that is unliving, untrue, unkind, unworthy, and to try through a number of forms, some more gentle, some more authoritarian, to get beyond them. One of my favorite examples from kind of like pop culture is, funny enough, God of War Ragnarok. Especially that DLC they just came out with, the Valhalla one. And I watched the whole version of it. I love the content. They just did it so well. And I just watched like all of the cutscenes where the main character, Kratos, being this god of war who has committed unspeakable acts that he, even like 1,000 years later, has not truly forgiven himself for. He carries as this demon, is brought to confront them by, funny enough, another god of war, in the form of Tyr, who is a more like a spiritual teacher, a helping friend. And one of the main tools that he uses to help heal Kratos is to get him to confront stuff that he had buried long ago, those demons from his early life, and then to recontextualize them. I highly recommend watching it because those writers, they clearly knew something of like good therapy and like spiritual work. It was actually really moving, funny enough, as you're destroying like Draugr and like all these awesome enemies, and it just looks beautiful. But that's one of the biggest ways, is to look at those things, to contextualize them in a more loving, almost unearthly like set of consequences, and also to view them more truly, that human life is fundamentally difficult, that you are fundamentally have things within you that kind of set you up to fail, and that ultimately most people would rather be good if they could, and that we do make mistakes, or at least that our motivations are not often as wicked as our egos are quick to judge them as. And then by extension, so are other people. Lastly, the other thing to do, in addition to like practices, like you said, was to place the mind's attention on like stuff like virtues, to kind of grow those more healing and nourishing parts of the self, to promote healing and evolution.
You gotta grab this mic in a specific way, It's like, that's well put. Beautiful. Niels is throwing me gang signs, man. He said you're gonna kill him now. He's getting all aggressive over there. You gotta go work out your soul child, Niels. Just know if Niels, if you do try to kill me one day, Gino's gonna get you. That's just karma, bro. That's your karma, dude. That's such his fate, baby. Um, and I do feel for everyone's like on their own journey, and the moral of the story of a lot of this is, clean your slate so you can help out others and everything, and be a leader and be the man in the house. All right. Lastly, Chat GPT comes in hot. How do you envision the future of spirituality, and what role do you hope it will play in society? Let's talk about 100 years from now. How do you hope the mankind is?
So I think a thing that gets thrown around in more like modern spiritual circles, like the people who, like, if they're on like a census or a survey and it says, hey, do you have religious beliefs? And then you say yes, it says okay, and it gives you options, and one of those options is like spiritual but not religious. In a lot of those circles, they will often believe and see spirituality as like a form of evolution. you know um I think in some faiths they would see it that way, other faiths maybe not, but that's how I see it. I often talk about in some other talks I give outside of our fun podcast that you really look at the world, like that comfortable world we live in, and you see how it is because we developed our intellects and our minds so much. Like even now, I only know all these things I know because I was facilitated by the technology and technological evolution of our people. I am only able to share these words and even my fucking like image with you because the invention of the camera, the phone, the computer, the microphone, and all of the attendant understandings, like the things that people were able to scientifically discover and then explain to other people, and then we can make technology out of it. It's amazing. It's truly of worth. We've come really, really far intellectually, and you can even say academically. Where most people have not come as far is spiritually. Again, spiritually meaning the mastery of like their own spirit, their own soul, their own living essence. You ask the average person to meditate for 10 minutes and and it is the longest 10 minutes of their life. Never mind that they could have wasted 10 minutes on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok with like so quickly, like they didn't even notice it. You ask people to like heal, and it's so difficult. You need like professionals to help you. You ask people to forgive. Like I've had students where you try to teach them the value of forgiveness and they look like, why do you want to shoot me in the foot? It's sad. It's tragic. Or, resist a temptation. I know that's one that I can, I think a lot of people can struggle with. So I see where I think humanity goes in 100 years, and what I'd love to see as spirituality goes, is that people evolve in the spirit. They learn how to better wield themselves, which will, of course, facilitate their ability to use these amazing tools. They developed, everyone's got the friggin' Library of Alexandria in their pocket, but they'll spend most of their time on Instagram, at least if you're me. Through that is like the next step in what people could be, to bring their minds to bear, and as they rise in consciousness, as people rise in consciousness, one of the amazing things is that part of rising in consciousness is becoming more intelligent. And a lot of times that's where we can see people get in trouble. They're more capable, so they can get more for themselves. Their egos can run amok. But beyond that state, beyond the state of genius, the higher fields of of spiritual growth, of higher consciousness, and even those including the enlightened states, are just like fundamentally good. They are states where things like love, compassion, wisdom, restraint, mercy, service, devotion, sacredness become prevalent. So naturally, when these, and this is, one of the cruxes of spiritual growth and of higher consciousness, like in the Christian faith, they don't really even do that many practices, like in the form of like, you don't meditate as a Christian. I mean, to some Christians, that's devil shit, But just through trying to become virtuous, do they grow spiritually? Just through like trying to understand virtues in my own experience was what grew me a lot of the way. And they're called a virtue for a reason. These are good things. And as we step into that, we cannot help but want to help others. Because as we start to feel more, like we were talking earlier, of course, we can't help but empathize with others. Because we see the truth that others are very similar to myself. Their subjective experience has many universals that I share. And that all people know to live is better than to die. To feel good is better than to feel bad. To have a meaningful life is better than to feel like you wasted it. And so where I really hope spirituality can go, what I really want to be a part of is just making these teachings that it really doesn't matter what faith you fall into, or even if you believe in something like God or an afterlife, even matters. I just want to see people evolve into these like higher realms of their own being that fundamentally make life better and more worthwhile and are beneficial to the lives of others. I think if we're lucky, that's where mankind is going to want to go. That's like one of the next natural steps of their evolutionary path, since our bodies probably aren't evolving that much anymore. We already have a lot to work with.
You don't think we're gonna be like 9 foot tall? But
I wish. I mean, you keep saying it, sit down.
he's 9 foot tall. This should be in public schools, and this should be more of a put forward. Peace of mind is just this needs to be pushed to the masses in a more way, not like pushed to them like, hey, do this, but it's so beneficial. The world would be a better place. We're gonna wrap it right here. What a genius. It's a lovely time. Hope you learned something. See you next episode. That was great. That was fun, bro.
Dude, good questions, man.
Yeah.
Shout out ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, baby.
Shout out ChatGPT.